Cyprus is the island of love. It's on her shores that Aphrodite is said to have emerged from the foam. Though, unlike the goddess herself, Aphrodite's island does not always command love at first sight. It takes some time to appreciate the beauties of a mountain terrain that for centuries has given nurture and protection to its sons and daughters. And where Kykkos Monastery in particular is a symbol to Cypriots of their freedom and independence. The name Kykkos is strongly bound up with that of Archbishop Macarius III, who prepared the way for the island's acquisition of self-rule in 1960. The monastery was founded in 1080, but its current appearance, including its series of frescoes in the Byzantine style, dates only from the 19th and 20th centuries. Kykkos' most treasured possession is its icon of the Virgin Mary. According to legend, it was painted by the evangelist Luke himself. The port of Paphos. Each year during the summer months, this little harbour and its fortifications form the backdrop for an opera festival. This is the smallest of Cyprus's coastal towns, and the islanders themselves, as well as the tourists, have a special affection for it. Here, they say, is where the gods take their holidays. The combination of sun and sea is ideal for swimming and water sports. Or, from another point of view, Limassol is living proof of the island's highly developed tourism infrastructure, a symbol of Cyprus's economic miracle. Even nowadays, Aphrodite is ever present on Cyprus. On top of the white cliffs of Petra tou Romiou, she has lent her name to one of the finest golf courses in Europe. And after a round of golf, a stroll along the cliffs, or a spot of horse riding, there's nothing finer than to relax on Pissouri Beach with a glass of good Cyprus wine and a taste of one of the local delicacies. Kalawassos and Tochnis, Cyprus village on the coast of Light, offers a treat for riders. The chance to experience the surrounding waves, rocks and mountains on horseback is something very special. When the sun strikes them, the cliffs of Petra tou Romiou rise out of the sea like burning gold. This is the place where, according to myth, Aphrodite too rose out of the foaming surf. All over the world, Aphrodite is linked with love and beauty. Statues of her, hewn from marble, have made her immortal. With the spread of Christendom, the goddess of love was recast into the chaste and innocent figure of the Virgin Mary. Over 10,000 years ago, back in the Stone Age, the first settlers landed on Cyprus by boat and began to establish their way of life. Chirokitia is an example of one such site. round huts with stone foundations and roofs made of clay, shaped like those of old-fashioned beehives. They housed both the living and the dead, because these first settlers used to bury their dead under the floor in a squatting position. This is all vividly illustrated by small clay models. This one showing a devotee peering over the wall of a shrine, absorbed in the ritual being performed within. And here, a beautifully shaped 6,000-year-old fertility charm made of steatite, showing how it would have been worn around the neck. It was meant to protect the wearer and guarantee her fertility. Another image sums up the whole of the Neolithic age. A wooden plough through-furrowing the rich soil between a team of oxen. In those days, the people lived by hunting and fishing. Birds, too, gorged on the fruits of the gardens of Poseidon, scenes that their artists used to capture delightfully on painted vases. The Apollo Hilates temple at Kourion dates from the 1st century AD. Its name is puzzling and occurs only in Cyprus. Hilates means forest, so it must refer to a god of that type of vegetation, and presumably this region was densely wooded in antiquity. The Achilles mosaic in Paphos is from the 5th century BC, and the story it relates to forms a link between antiquity and the present day. It depicts King Peleus, his wife Thetis, and the birth of their son Achilles, where he is being given the bath of immortality, a motif that Christian art later adapted for its depictions of the birth and washing of Christ. Baptism in the Greek Orthodox Church has elements in common with the bath of immortality, as well as with frescoes of the Nativity showing the washing of Christ. The deeper imports of the baptism go all the way back to the creation of Adam and the story of Noah's Ark. At the start of the ceremony, the priest blows his breath into the child 3 times. And just as the dove once bore the olive branch to Noah as a sign of salvation, the baby that is being baptized is anointed and crossed with consecrated oil as a token of lifelong protection in his battle with the devil. Only then is the whole body of the child immersed in water, as in antiquity, a gesture that is also reminiscent of the bathing of Siegfried in his attempt to achieve invulnerability. In Siegfried's case, it was the oak leaf between his shoulders that frustrated the attempt, whereas with the hero of antiquity, it was his Achilles' heel that eventually brought about his death, the place where his nurse had held him by the foot as she dunked him in the water. In the early Christian baptistry of Kourion, the full-sized cruciform font, symbolizing the united cosmos, still survives. In it, the adult candidate for baptism was required to wade metaphorically through the primeval ocean, the realm of the dead, so as to achieve salvation by the act of ritual cleansing. For the people of Cyprus, Kourion's most prosperous period was in Roman times. In the early days of Christianity, the city was the seat of a bishop, but afterwards it fell into the hands of the Arabs. Kourion's steep slopes and the good winds above the ancient city are a constant temptation to hang glider enthusiasts to show off their talents, conjuring up thoughts of Icarus and Daedalus and of man's first attempts at flying. This royal scepter, fashioned from gold, is evidence that even as early as the Mycenaean age, Cyprus had regular trading links with Greece. The masterpiece is topped with a pair of falcons and dates from the 11th century BC. This conical rhiton made of faience, with its elegant animal, hunting and floral motifs, is also a Mycenaean work of art, but from the 13th century BC. The Troodos Mountains are where Macarius III grew up. Above Kukos Monastery, there is a path that leads to his mausoleum. Along the way, The trees and bushes are festooned with ribbons that visitors have tied to them in his honor, conveying their respect and their hopes for the future. The mausoleum of the former Archbishop and the first President of the Republic of Cyprus is an unpretentious memorial. 2 soldiers stand guard over it day and night. Below this promontory, surrounded by majestic mountains, lies the village of Panagia, the birthplace of Macarius III. Michalis Muskos became Archbishop Macarius III in 1950 at the age of 37. His home, now a museum, is a traditional house that radiates warmth and modesty, but the story of Cyprus which it tells is one of blood spilled in the struggle for freedom. It was in 1954, when the island was still part of the British Empire, that Macarius first brought the Cyprus problem before the United Nations. Greek Cypriots were fighting against the British for Enosis, unification with Greece. Turkish Cypriots were using violent means to try to achieve partition of the island. On the 16th of August 1960, the Republic was finally declared. But the peace was to be short-lived. Under the watchful eye of the British, Turkish troops occupied the northern part of the Republic on the 20th of July 1974, and the saga of the occupation still goes on, with barbed wire and soldiers still keeping the people of the 2 communities apart. The Turkish invasion of 1974 created deep wounds. 37% of the island's territory came under Turkish occupation. 180,000 Greek Cypriots, about a third of the population, were forced to flee, leaving all their goods and chattels behind in the occupied territory. More than 70% of the Republic's economic resources were lost. Today, UN soldiers still guard the demarcation line between the southern part of the Republic and the part occupied by Turkey. The excellent climate, with sunshine throughout the whole year, and the good soil on the southern slopes of the Troodos Mountains are ideal for wine growing. Cyprus produces wines of very high quality. But a large proportion of the grapes are not used for winemaking. They're loaded onto refrigerator ships and exported to the central parts of Europe. As early as Minoan and Mycenaean times, people knew how to cultivate the vine. According to legend, it was Icarus who was given the secrets of viticulture and fermentation by Dionysos, the god of wine. A mosaic floor in a Roman villa at Paphos shows Dionysos on the back of a panther, with Icarus bringing him an ox cart laden with wineskins. The accompanying caption describes these 2 reeling figures as the first men to drink wine. The sweet juice of the grape is also used for making the Cyprus speciality shushuko. Strings of almonds are soaked in the simmering juice, which has been savored with rose water, then, rather like candle making, hung up to dry in the open air. Nuts do not always grow on trees. Peanuts, as their alternative name groundnuts implies, grow beneath the soil like potatoes. The plants make a very practical crop that is grown all over Cyprus and usually brings a good return for the farmers. Banana plantations are found mainly in the southwest of Cyprus, around Paphos. The fruit they produce is mostly sold at local markets. Sheep and goats are still pastured through the hills and valleys of the island. In the days of the ancient myths, Zeus, the father of the gods, was fed milk from the goat Amalthea when he was a little boy. Cyprus's halloumi cheese is distantly related to traditional Arab cheeses. It can be made either from goat's milk or from a mixture of goat, sheep and cow's milk. It's seasoned with mint and matured in whey, and is such a speciality that more than 4,000 tons of it are exported per annum. Mint and salt are added to the milk while it's simmering over an open fire. The thickened mass is spread out and wrapped in cheesecloth, and then it's transferred to a kind of vice, where the whey is squeezed out of it. Finally, the halloumi is taken out again and cut into portions. Grilled halloumi makes a fantastic starter to a meal. The convent of St. Iraklidios, founded in the 15th century, had long been in a state of complete disrepair before it was rebuilt in 1962 at the instigation of Macarius III. It now houses a community of 27 nuns who not only run the convent but also harvest and process a lot of the food that they grow on its land. Walnuts are gathered while they're still unripe and are boiled until they lose their bitterness. Then by boiling them up again in syrup, they're turned into delicious preserved karidaki. The nuns also make quantities of wonderful marzipan from a mixture of ground almonds, sugar and rosewater. But the nuns are also worldly enough to make use of modern technology. They use computerized machines to produce high-quality embroidered textiles and raiments. There has been similar recovery on a larger scale. Limassol was a town of just 70,000, and its docks were insignificant at the time when the major port of Famagusta came under Turkish occupation following the 1974 conflict. Now its population has doubled, and it has become an international port, a thriving example of Cyprus's economic miracle. Here and throughout the island, there's now a highly developed infrastructure and an efficient service network, making Cyprus a very good location for European investors. It goes without saying that up-to-date telecommunications and a television service with a wide range of international programs are also part of the modern Cyprus. Although Nicosia is divided in two by barbed wire and sandbags, the way Berlin used to be, the free part has all the aspects of a modern European city. Since 1974, it has succeeded in re-establishing itself, particularly as an international centre of finance. Even in modern banks, an element of tradition is still maintained. It's quite normal to find religious icons alongside computers. The international financial world is also well represented in Nicosia. And despite having a population of only 840,000, 170,000 of whom are in the Turkish-occupied area, Cyprus has transport links with all parts of the world. On the 23rd of April 2003, the Turkish occupation authorities took the world by surprise when for the first time they allowed Greek and Turkish Cypriots to cross the demarcation line and return for a day to the villages where they used to live. Thousands of people spontaneously took the opportunity and made their way across via the Ledra Palace checkpoint in Nicosia, at the time the only UN Green Line crossing point on the island. There were dramatic scenes, with young and old and entire family groups carrying bouquets and candles as they journeyed to their ancestral homes in the Turkish-occupied area, sometimes to be faced with despair. Many of their houses were in ruins, their churches and cemeteries desecrated, or they found strangers, resettled Turkish peasants from Anatolia, living in their homes. Many Turkish Cypriots too took advantage of the temporary visiting concession, but they, for the most part, found their houses untouched. Cyprus television broadcast live coverage from Ledra Palace checkpoint. The returning pilgrims told of their experiences, of their shock, their anger, and their sadness. By now, 3 further crossing points have been established along the demarcation line to accommodate the regular stream of visitors from both sides. There are some wonderful ancient monuments in the Turkish-occupied part of the islands. In antiquity, Salamis was the most important city on Cyprus. The oldest finds date back to the time of the Greek settlement in the 11th century BC. The earliest mention of the city is found in texts of the Assyrian king Sargon II from 709 BC. Any remnants of the archaic and classical periods of Salamis still lie hidden beneath the protective soil. The parts of buildings that can be seen are nearly all from Roman and early Christian times. This horned god of the city from the 12th century BC originates from the imposing city of Enkomi, which once stood just a few miles west of Salamis. This ivory sphinx with faience ornamentation once decorated a royal throne in Salamis in the 8th century BC. The tall and graceful pillars of Salamis are like something out of Homer's Iliad and a reminder of Toikos from that other Attic island and city of Salamis, who, when he was exiled by his father, King Telamon, founded his own Salamis here on Cyprus. Kantara, the castle in the Pendadactylos Mountains. This bastion was erected by the Lusignans, one of the noble families of France, who turned Cyprus into a flourishing kingdom and base for crusaders between 1191 and 1489. The view ranges down over the slopes to the north coast, and to the east it stretches as far as Famagusta. When danger threatened, the defendants used to employ smoke signals and beacons to warn the castles of Bufavento and St. Hilarion further to the west. Near the north coast, in the tiny hamlet of Davlos, the Denktash regime have done their best to create a new reality. Here there's a wrecked and plundered Orthodox church, and only a few yards away, a newly built mosque. Anyone visiting Famagusta nowadays is confronted with a small town of no more than 20,000 inhabitants. What was once an international port has now sunk into insignificance. Only a small bazaar and the many fine examples of Gothic architecture bear token to what was once a thriving city. The former St. Nicholas Cathedral is a masterpiece of French Gothic that was built between 1298 and 1326. Famagusta capitulated to the Turks on the 1st of August 1571. Since then, the cathedral has been used as the Mustafa Pasha Mosque. Kyrenia, which used to be one of the finest harbour towns of the region, shows all the ravages of the Turkish occupation. It's a place that enjoys all the blessings of nature and history. Fishing boats and yachts rock lazily to and fro in its romantic harbour, and it would still be possible to while away an untroubled holiday in Kyrenia if it were not for the thoughts of the times before the Turkish invasion, when more than 4,000 Greek Cypriots were living in the town. Today it's inhabited by some 8,000 Turks, only a minority of whom are Turkish Cypriots. You can search in vain for any streets bearing Greek names. The Turkish-occupied part of North Nicosia has experienced a slight upturn in the last few years. The Haydar Pasha Mosque, until 1570 St. Catherine's Cathedral, still stands at the heart of the city and is the most important Islamic place of worship in Cyprus. Built in the French Gothic style, its foundations were laid in 1209, but it was not ready for dedication until 120 years later. With great attention to detail, several historical buildings in the Turkish quarter of Nicosia have been carefully restored, including the old caravanserai Büyük Khan. It's an early Ottoman construction dating from 1572. In contemporary terms, caravanserais were set up throughout the Arab world as motels for camel trains, where both the journeying merchants and their animals were provided with food and accommodation. The part of Cyprus's capital that is not under occupation, particularly the old town of Nicosia, the Laiki Hitonia, is a welcome oasis of peace and quiet. The letterboxes and telephone kiosks, as well as the left-hand drive on Cyprus, are a remnant of British rule which continued until 1960. Encounters with nature are always a source of fresh delight on Cyprus, and that is particularly true when you're on foot. The impressive Avakas Gorge on the west coast of the island near Aios Yorios is a must for all those looking to experience the best in nature. sun and the deep blue sea, the coast of light, snow. Skiing in the Troodos Mountains on the slopes of the 6,000-foot Mount Olympus, empty beaches, and the sensational treasures of a UNESCO World Heritage location far from the trammels of mass tourism. Those are the delights of a winter holiday on Cyprus. And then the spring with all its explosion of flowers. Stavrovouni, according to legend, was founded by Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine the Great. In the year 327, she survived a shipwreck on the coast of Larnaca. In a dream, she was bidden to establish a convent high above on the mountain and to make a gift to it of a fragment of the cross of Christ that she'd brought back from Jerusalem. Pascha, Easter, is the Orthodox Christians' most important festival. Baking begins on Maundy Thursday, and flaunis, a type of pastry filled with cheese, is a speciality on Cyprus. In Kelaki, the epitaphios, the tomb of Christ, is decorated with carnations. In other villages, girls pick wild spring flowers to deck out the grave. Noisily, the young people of the village toss Judas onto the crackling Easter bonfire. For Orthodox Christians, this is a way of ensuring that Judas is really dead and that he can't use trickery to avoid being resurrected in the face of the Lord. Deep in prayer, and even before the moment of resurrection, the faithful approach the tomb of Christ, cross themselves, respectfully bend the knee, and kiss the epitaphios. In the completely darkened church, the priest takes the light of the resurrection from the Holy of Holies and carries it to the congregation, using his candle to pass it to the person directly opposite him. Then the light of God spreads like wildfire. Christos anesti, Christ is risen, and alithos anesti, truly he is risen, the members of the congregation call out to each other. With the coming of Easter Sunday, Lent is finally over. Now families can get together with their friends for the joyful Easter banquet, which is rather like the symposium of antiquity. Cyprus's most popular tourist spot is Ayia Napa, which boomed after the Turkish invasion of 1974, when it became a substitute for the now inaccessible beach hotels. Capo Greco, in the far southeast of the island, is a favorite destination for excursions from here. In the center of Ayia Napa is another oasis that has been carefully preserved from the old fishing village, the convent of the Holy Virgin of the Forest, which was built by the Venetians in 1540. Nowadays, it's open to the public as a museum. The Troodos Mountains are a treasure house filled with examples of Cyprus's cultural inheritance. Omodos is a village that is rich in both historic buildings and Cypriot handicrafts. The local women sell stylish embroidery and ceramics, and their honey, olive oil, and candied fruits are also much in demand. And here, as everywhere, you come across Aphrodite. She has made the whole of Cyprus her own. Some excellent examples of Cyprus's traditional architecture can be seen in the museum village of Fikadu. Typically, the houses are built from solid blocks of stone without mortar, and courtyards and terraces are a common feature. Sophronia Theodorou represents the third generation of her family to be involved in making ceramics. Just as they did in ancient times, she uses a simple potter's wheel turned by a treadle. The shapes and bird motifs of her works are inspired by those of antiquity. No other topographical region within the orbit of the Orthodox Church can boast so many outstanding examples of Byzantine art as the Troodos Mountains. Panaia to Araka at Lago de Ra, with its frescoes dating from 1192, is one of UNESCO's World Cultural Heritage Sites. Within the zenith of the dome, Christ Pantocrator reigns in majesty over the cosmos, in a panoply of the church's sacred imagery. The overall composition is remarkably homogeneous in both form and content. There's a real sense of movement in the figure of the Archangel with his fluttering robes, hastening to Mary with the good tidings of the Annunciation. The important quality of these paintings is their warmth and humanity. Kalinikos, a monk from Stavrovouni Monastery, paints icons in the traditional Cyprus manner. Every aspect of his work follows the pattern of Byzantine icons. Kiti, a little place on the outskirts of Larnaca, is the home of the finest single example of Byzantine mosaic work in the whole of the Orthodox Church. Situated in the apse and dating from the second half of the 6th century, it depicts the infant Jesus blessing the Virgin Mary. Right next to the salt lake at Larnaca stands Khala Sultan Teke, the mausoleum of Haram, the aunt or foster mother of Muhammad. It's one of the most holy places in the whole of Islam. Exploring Cyprus on foot and having a chance to take in both the coast of light and the mountainscape of Troodos from close quarters is one of those rare experiences that quietly touch the soul. Being close to the sea and surrounded by verdant countryside, Kourion Theatre, dating from the 2nd century and with seating for an audience of 3,500, seems blessed with an idyllic setting. Yet this impression only applies to people who visit it nowadays. In antiquity, the stage would have had high backdrops, hiding the view of the landscape and the azure sea. Although they're known as the royal tombs, there were never any kings buried here. These rock-hewn chambers for the dead are like the atriumed houses of the living. They were constructed in the Doric style with attention to the smallest detail. And who can guess how many laborers, most of them slaves, must have lost their lives in the quarrying process before they had finally chiseled out these resting places for well-to-do Greeks and Romans. The hermit Neophytos preferred to live in a cave while he was still alive. It was in a grotto that he wrote defiant pamphlets against the exploitation of Cyprus by foreigners. And while he still lived, his believers worshipped him as a saint. In 1183 and 1196, Neophytos had his church in the rock decorated by artists from Constantinople, in such a way that he could dwell in the presence of Christ. and also be carried up to heaven by angels, in the manner of Christ himself. The watchtower of Colossae originates from a short intermezzo in the history of the Knights of the Order of St. John on their way back from Jerusalem. After the defeat at Akkon in 1291, the order moved to Cyprus for a period of 19 years, but the tower was only put up around 1454 on land still owned by the order, long after it had established its centre on Rhodes. In 1522, the order was driven out of there and moved to Malta, from which it is still operating throughout Europe as a Catholic branch of the Knights of Malta and a Protestant branch of the Order of St. John. Sun, sand and sky may be replaceable. The island republic of Cyprus certainly isn't. It's incomparable. Where else can you look upon 10,000 years of history in the course of a short walk? Where else do you find Phoenician buildings and Roman mosaics, Greek temples and Gothic cathedrals on one and the same island? And where do you find British reticence combined with Mediterranean hospitality and Oriental charm? Only on Cyprus.